The hunt begins, a warrior's nightmare. The dark sky of Drakthar stretched endlessly above the jungle, thick with mist and strange sounds. The planet was forbidden, a place only the bravest warriors dared to enter. Its air carried the scent of death, and the ground was littered with the bones of creatures that had failed to survive. Commander Xylar stood at the edge of the jungle, his Vulri strike team behind him. They were the best hunters in the galaxy, trained to fight any enemy. But tonight, fear crept into their hearts. Their mission was simple, but deadly. They had come to kill a Shadrax, the most feared predator in the known universe. No creature was more dangerous. It was fast, intelligent, and covered in black armor-like scales that could withstand plasma fire. Its tendrils could cut through metal, and its acidic blood melted anything it touched. No warrior had ever fought one and lived to tell the tale. But the Galactic Council had issued a bounty. The Shadrax had killed thousands, and now, the Vulri had been hired to eliminate it. Failure was not an option. Xylar gripped his energy rifle tightly. His red eyes scanned the trees, looking for movement. His team was silent, their weapons ready. They had trained for months for this moment. Then, suddenly, the trees ahead shook violently. Xylar raised his fist, signaling his team to halt. Something was there, something massive. The jungle fell silent. Even the insects stopped chirping. Then came the sound, a deep guttural growl that made the air vibrate. The Shadrax was near. Xylar swallowed hard. He motioned for his sniper to climb a nearby rock for a better view. The sniper activated his scope. "Commander, there's something else out there." Xylar frowned. "What do you mean?" The sniper zoomed in, adjusting his vision. His hands trembled. "There's a human." Xylar's entire body stiffened. Impossible. No human would be foolish enough to set foot on Drakthar. They were weak creatures, fragile compared to the Vulri. No human could survive here. But before he could speak, the sniper gasped. "By the gods, the human is standing right in front of the Shadrax." Xylar grabbed his own scope and looked. His heart pounded. There, in the middle of the jungle, stood a lone figure, a human male. He wore a torn jacket, black pants, and a backpack slung over his shoulder. His hair was messy, and his face showed no fear. But what made Xylar's blood run cold was that he wasn't running. Instead, the human grinned. And then, he took a bite of something in his hand. Xylar zoomed in. His blood froze. The human was eating a piece of Shadrax flesh. A loud snarl filled the jungle as the Shadrax lunged forward. The beast was twice the size of a Vulri warrior, its tendrils snapping like whips, its acidic saliva dripping onto the ground, burning through stone. Xylar braced himself, expecting the human to be ripped apart. But the human just stepped to the side. Effortlessly, with an almost lazy movement, he dodged the deadly strike. The Shadrax, confused, turned its head, trying to track its target. The human took another bite of the flesh in his hand and chewed slowly, as if he had all the time in the world. Xylar's team watched in horror. This wasn't normal. This wasn't possible. Then the human chuckled. "That all you got?" The Shadrax screeched in rage and charged again, its tendrils aiming to pierce the human's chest. But something changed. The human's eyes flickered with a strange light. His muscles tensed, his posture shifted. And then, he caught the tendril with his bare hand. Xylar couldn't believe what he was seeing. The Shadrax, a creature feared across the galaxy, had been stopped mid-attack by a single human. The beast struggled, pulling back, trying to break free. But the human tightened his grip, and with a sudden jerk, he ripped the tendril clean off. The Shadrax let out a piercing scream. The human took another bite of meat, completely unbothered. Then he looked in Xylar's direction, as if sensing them. He smiled. "Oh hey, you guys hungry?" Xylar's entire team froze in terror. This wasn't just a human. This was a monster in human form. Impossible. The human that defies death. The jungle of Drakthar was deathly silent. The air, thick with tension, barely moved as the Vulri strike team watched in horror. Commander Xyler's breath came shallow and slow. His clawed fingers tightened around his energy rifle, but for the first time in his long military career, he wasn't sure if a weapon would help. Because what he was seeing should not be possible. The human, this foolish, insane human, stood before the galaxy's deadliest predator, casually chewing on its flesh like it was a simple meal. He had ripped off one of the Shadrex's tendrils with his bare hands and showed no sign of injury. And worst of all, he was smiling. The Shadrex, a creature feared across 1,000 worlds, shrank back, its massive form shifting in hesitation. Its acid-dripping fangs, its razor-sharp tendrils, its crimson eyes that paralyzed prey with a single glare, none of it seemed to intimidate the human. Xyler's elite warriors were frozen, their training useless in the face of something beyond their understanding. The human licked his fingers, then smirked at the terrified Vulri squad. "You guys ever try this stuff? Tastes kinda like beef jerky." Xyler's second-in-command, Sergeant Kale, swallowed hard. "Commander, what are we looking at?" Xyler didn't answer. He didn't have an answer. The human had no armor, no visible weapons, no energy shields. And yet, the Shadrex, a predator that could tear through warships, looked like it wanted to flee. And then, the Shadrex attacked. It moved faster than a blink, its remaining tendrils snapping forward like lightning, aimed directly at the human's head and chest. No one, not even Xyler, had time to react. The jungle shook as the beast's full power was unleashed. And yet, the human was gone. A monster that moves like a ghost. The Vulri squad barely registered the movement. One moment, the human was standing in front of the beast. The next, he was behind it. It wasn't teleportation. There was no flash, no distortion of space. It was pure, raw speed. The Shadrex howled in confusion, twisting its massive body, its acidic blood spraying against the jungle floor, melting stone like wax. The human stood with his hands in his jacket pockets, his head tilted slightly. "Huh, that was kinda slow." Xyler's mind raced. His kind, the Vulri, were warriors, known for their reflexes and strength. They could react within 1/10 of a second. Their bodies were built for battle. But even with all their training, none of them had even seen the human move. The Shadrex let out a deafening roar, its tendrils curling inward, its muscles tightening. It knew now, this was not normal prey. It was afraid. Xyler's eyes widened in realization. The deadliest predator in the galaxy was terrified of a single human. The secret of the human's strength. "All right, my turn." The human stepped forward. His casual, unhurried movements sent a shiver through Xyler's spine. He had seen warriors fight before. He had watched entire battlefields turn to ash. But this was different. This wasn't a warrior. This was something worse. The Shadrex lunged again, its jaws unhinging, revealing rows of dagger-like teeth designed to tear through starship hulls. The human didn't move, not until the last possible moment. Then, he ducked. His movement was so smooth, so effortless, it felt unnatural. The Shadrex missed completely. Its massive head slammed into the ground, the impact sending a shockwave through the jungle, trees splitting like twigs. And then, the human jumped. But he didn't just jump. He soared. Xyler's enhanced Vulri vision tracked the movement. The human's legs tensed for just a fraction of a second, and then he shot straight into the air, 15 meters high. No species could do that. The Shadrex tried to follow, its tendrils reaching up, but it was too late. Mid-air, the human's fist clenched. His casual smirk vanished. And then, he came down like a meteor. The moment his fist connected with the Shadrex's skull, the sound that followed was not a scream. It was an explosion. The ground split apart, sending dust and debris flying in every direction. The shockwave knocked Siler's entire squad off their feet. When the dust settled, the Shaderex was no more. The jungle had a massive crater where the beast once stood. Its body lay twitching, its once indestructible exoskeleton cracked open like an egg. And the human. He stood over its corpse, stretching his arms. Woo! That was a good workout. A new horror awakens. Siler could not process what he had just seen. The deadliest creature in the galaxy had been beaten. Not with weapons, not with technology, but with bare hands. Impossible, Siler whispered. The human turned, his gaze locking onto the Vulri squad. His smirk returned. So, what brings you guys here? Looking for a fight too. Siler's instincts screamed at him to run. But he had fought in wars, faced nightmares beyond imagination. And right now, this human was the most terrifying thing he had ever seen. Sergeant Kale, still breathing hard, muttered in disbelief. Commander, what the hell is he? Siler swallowed, his clawed hands shaking slightly. I don't know, but we need to find out. The human stepped forward. The ground beneath his feet cracked from the sheer force of his presence. And then, he grinned. So, are we gonna fight, or are you guys just gonna stare? The terrifying truth about humans. The jungle of Drakthar was still smoldering. The crater where the Shaderex once stood was carved deep into the earth, its once indestructible form reduced to a broken husk. And standing over its corpse, as if nothing had happened, was the human. Commander Siler had seen death before. He had fought wars, witnessed empires fall, and watched warriors stronger than him crumble under the weight of battle. But this was not a battle. This was a massacre. His squad, the elite warriors of the Vulri Empire, remained frozen, staring at the human as if they had just seen a god step down from the stars. And the human, he wasn't panting. He wasn't injured. He wasn't even concerned. Instead, he dusted off his hands, cracked his neck, and turned toward them with a grin. Man, I haven't eaten something that tough in a while. You guys seriously never tried this. Siler's second-in-command, Sergeant Kale, took a cautious step forward. His voice barely held steady. What? Are you? The human's grin widened. Oh, I'm Ethan. Just a regular guy from Earth. The horror of human biology. Siler couldn't move. He had spent years studying different species across the stars, memorizing their strengths, their weaknesses. But nothing in his knowledge explained what he had just witnessed. The Shaderex was a monster that could tear through starship hulls. It had acidic blood, regenerating cells, and an aura that killed weaker beings on sight. Even the Galactic Council feared it. And yet this Ethan had eaten it, absorbed it. And somehow he had grown stronger. Sergeant Kale glanced at the scattered remains of the Shaderex. Commander, his body. Look at it. Siler's eyes narrowed. He activated his bioscanner and pointed it toward Ethan. The readings made no sense. The human's muscle density was increasing. His reflexes had doubled in speed. His energy levels had spiked beyond any known biological limit. Siler's stomach twisted. Ethan wasn't just eating to survive. He was eating to evolve. This is not possible, Siler whispered. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Not possible. Buddy, this is just lunch. A galaxy that underestimated humans. Cal's voice was shaky. Humans aren't supposed to be this strong. We fought them before. They were nothing special. Ethan shrugged. Well, yeah, most of us don't go around eating space monsters. I mean, we usually stick to, normal food. Burgers, pizza, stuff like that. He glanced back at the half-eaten remains of the Shaderex. But sometimes, you gotta adapt. Siler's clawed fingers curled into a fist. Adapt? What do you mean? Ethan stretched his arms casually. You ever hear of mitochondria? 'Cause back on Earth, they call it the powerhouse of the cell. Turns out, we got a little extra. Cal's eyes flickered with panic. Commander, I've heard rumors about human adaptability before, but this is beyond anything the galaxy knows. Xylar took a slow step forward. His warrior instincts screamed danger, but his mind demanded answers. Explain. Now. Ethan smirked. All right, but you might not like what you hear. The secret power of humanity. Ethan crouched down, picking up a shard of Shadrach's flesh from the ground. The piece of meat still twitched, its cells refusing to die. You see this? Your scanners probably tell you this thing is alive, yeah? Xylar checked his bioscanner. It was true. The Shadrach's flesh was still pulsing, regenerating, trying to rebuild itself. Ethan chuckled. That's because the Shadrach has hyper-regenerative DNA. It's why it's so hard to kill. But you know what happens when I eat something with strong DNA? He popped the flesh into his mouth and chewed casually. Xylar's scanner went wild. The human's biological readings were shifting again. Cal staggered backward. Commander, his muscle fibers just strengthened by another 12%. Xylar's breath caught. He's absorbing the creature's traits. Ethan snapped his fingers. Bingo. You ever wonder why humans spread so fast across the stars? Why we can live in extreme climates, breathe different air, adapt to whatever's thrown at us? It's because of this. He pointed at himself. We don't just survive. He smirked. We consume. The moment of dread. Xylar stepped back. The pieces were falling into place, and the truth was more terrifying than any war he had fought. The Galactic Council, the empires, they never knew. Ethan laughed. Nope. They thought we were just weak, short-lived creatures. Good for trade, good for labor, not much else. His smile widened. They never stopped to think about what would happen if we started eating the things that kill us. Cal's breathing was rapid. Commander, if humans can do this, they're the most dangerous species in the galaxy. Xylar clenched his jaw. His people had spent centuries fearing the wrong monsters. The Shadrachs, the warlords, the ancient horrors that lurked in the void. None of them were the real threat. The real threat was standing right in front of him, and it was grinning. A dangerous offer. Ethan stretched again and looked at the Vulri squad. Anyway, I think I'm done here. Got what I came for. Xylar's voice was low, hesitant. What exactly did you come here for? Ethan cracked his knuckles. Oh, just a little power boost. I know, in case I run into something bigger. Xylar's stomach twisted. Bigger than a Shadrach's. What in the stars are you planning to fight? Ethan smiled. Ever heard of the galactic apex predators? Cal stiffened. That's just a legend. A species so powerful they were erased from history. Ethan's eyes gleamed. Yeah, about that. I think I found one. Xylar's blood ran cold. Ethan turned to leave, but then he glanced back at the Vulri warriors. You guys want to come with? Could be fun. The monster that fears the human. The jungle of Drakthar was never silent. Even in the darkest corners of the galaxy, the planet was known for its endless roars, shrieks, and the sounds of predators fighting for survival. But now, there was only silence. The Shadrachs, the apex predator feared across countless worlds, lay broken and lifeless, its once indestructible form shattered beneath the hands of a single human. Commander Xylar still couldn't believe it. His clawed fingers dug into the dirt as he slowly pushed himself up from the ground. His elite Vulri warriors beside him, all shaken, all trying to make sense of the impossible. They were trained for war. They had conquered worlds, wiped out entire species, and yet none of that experience could explain what they had just seen. A human had killed a Shadrach's. Not with weapons, not with strategy, but with his bare hands. And he wasn't even tired. Fear in the eyes of a predator. Xylar's eyes flicked toward Ethan, the human anomaly, who stood casually, rolling his shoulders like he had just finished stretching. The ground where he had landed was cracked, steam rising from the force of his impact. His fists had shattered the Shadrax's skull, reducing it to pulp. But what unsettled Sylar more than anything, more than the impossible power, more than the horrifying adaptability, was the expression on Ethan's face. He was grinning. Not like a warrior who had won a battle. Not like a soldier relieved to be alive. No, he was enjoying this. The Vulri had always believed they were the dominant warriors of the universe, that they stood at the peak of evolution, second only to the mightiest warlords. But as Sylar looked at Ethan, he felt something unfamiliar creeping into his chest, something no Vulri should ever feel. Fear, and he wasn't alone. The jungle trembled, and from the shadows, another Shadrax emerged. This one was larger, a matriarch, a beast twice the size of the one Ethan had just killed. Its 6 crimson eyes glowed in the darkness, its razor-sharp tendrils slithering forward, dripping with acid. Sylar reached for his weapon, instinct screaming for him to prepare for battle. But then, he saw something impossible. The Shadrax wasn't attacking. It was hesitating. Its massive body trembled, its tendrils twitching erratically, its breathing shallow and uneven. Sylar's heart stopped. The deadliest monster in the galaxy was afraid. Afraid of the human. The apex predator meets its match. Ethan turned his head, finally noticing the giant creature looming in the darkness. Oh, another one. He grinned. The Shadrax recoiled. Sylar had never seen anything like it. A Shadrax never hesitated. They were pure, mindless killers, creatures that lived only to hunt, only to destroy. And yet, this one recognized the danger in front of it. It recognized Ethan. Sylar barely had time to process it before the Shadrax did something even more unthinkable. It backed away. A creature that had never known fear, that had terrorized entire species, was actively retreating from a single unarmed human. Kel's voice was barely a whisper. It's afraid. Ethan blinked, then chuckled. Oh, come on. Really? You're just gonna leave? The Shadrax let out a low snarl, but it didn't step forward. It didn't attack. Instead, it turned, and in an instant, the colossal beast vanished into the jungle, running deeper into the shadows. Sylar felt a shudder pass through his entire squad. The Shadrax ran. It ran. What happens when humans eat too much? Sylar's throat was dry. His mind raced, trying to make sense of the nightmare unfolding in front of him. But Ethan sighed and scratched his head. Well, that sucks. I was hoping to try a bigger one. Kale tensed. Try? You wanted to fight it? On purpose? Ethan looked amused. Yeah, figured it might be stronger than the last one. Maybe it'd give me something new. Sylar's eyes narrowed. Something new? You mean more power? Ethan's smirk widened. Exactly. You see, the more I eat, the more I grow. Sylar's breath caught. That was it. That was the answer. The humans were not like other species. They weren't warriors. They weren't conquerors. They were hunters. And the more they consumed, the stronger they became. Sylar's scales prickled with unease. What happens when you eat too much? Ethan looked at him, really looked at him. And then, for the first time, his grin faded. I dunno. His voice was softer now, almost thoughtful. Haven't reached that point yet. A new nightmare for the galaxy. Silence. Sylar stared at him. He wanted to believe the human was joking, that this was all some elaborate bluff. But deep down he knew. It was the truth. There was no limit to what humans could become. If they were allowed to keep consuming, to keep evolving, there would come a day when no species in the galaxy would be able to stop them. Sylar's hands clenched into fists. He had to make a choice. Kill Ethan now, before it's too late. Try to befriend him, and hope humanity never sees the Vulri as food. Cal's voice broke through the silence. "Commander, what do we do?" Ethan stretched and yawned. "Welp, guess I'll head off. Unless you guys want to fight me or something." Xylar hesitated. They couldn't beat him. Not now. And if they tried, would Ethan eat them too? Xylar swallowed hard, then took a deep breath. "We should stay on your good side." Ethan's grin returned. Smart choice. Final suspense hook. As Ethan turned to leave, a deep, guttural growl echoed from the jungle. Xylar's blood ran cold. Something massive was approaching. Something far bigger than the Shadrex. Ethan stopped. He cracked his knuckles. And then, he smiled. "Oh, now this one feels interesting. The Battle of the Titans, or just a snack." The jungle of Drakthar trembled. Something enormous was moving through the darkness, crushing trees beneath its weight. The air grew thick with a suffocating pressure, as if the planet itself was warning every living thing to run. Commander Xylar's breath was shallow. His Vulri squad, elite warriors trained to fight the deadliest creatures in the galaxy, stood frozen. Their hands gripped their weapons, but deep inside, they knew. No weapon they carried would matter against what was coming. And then, from the mist, it stepped forward. A Shadrex Prime, the true king of predators. 6 times the size of the beast Ethan had just killed, its black exoskeleton shimmered with an unnatural aura. Its body was covered in spiked ridges, each one pulsing with some kind of bioluminescent energy. It was not just a beast. It was a god of destruction. And it had been watching. Waiting. Learning. Its crimson eyes locked onto Ethan. It had sensed what he was. Not prey. Not a rival. But something far, far worse. The one creature in the universe that could consume even a Shadrex. And the Prime would not allow it. The human that laughs in the face of death. Xylar's fingers twitched toward his communicator. Maybe, just maybe, they could call for orbital bombardment. Maybe they could burn this entire planet to ash before Ethan could get any stronger. But before he could act, Ethan grinned. "Oh, now this is interesting." He rolled his shoulders, his casual demeanor unchanged, even as the largest predator in the known galaxy stood before him. The Shadrex Prime let out a roar. The jungle shook violently, trees snapping like twigs. The force alone sent shockwaves through the air, shaking the very ground beneath their feet. Xylar and his squad were forced to brace themselves, their armor stabilizers barely keeping them from being thrown to the ground. But Ethan, he didn't move. He simply tilted his head. "That it? I was hoping for something scarier." Xylar felt his blood turn to ice. This wasn't confidence. This wasn't arrogance. This was a monster in human skin, looking at another monster and feeling nothing. The Shadrex Prime charge. An unstoppable force meets an immovable object. It was faster than lightning, faster than anything that size should ever be. Its tendrils lashed out, each one strong enough to slice through starship hulls. The jungle exploded in chaos. Massive trees ripped from their roots, the very ground torn apart. And yet, Ethan was already gone. Xylar's eyes struggled to track him, but it was impossible. One moment, he had been standing there. The next, he was on top of the Shadrex Prime. Perched on its back, laughing. The Prime screeched in confusion, twisting its impossibly massive body to shake him off. But Ethan simply held on, unfazed. "Dan, you're a big one. You got any special tricks, or is it just brute strength?" The Prime lashed out with a venomous tendril, aiming straight for Ethan's head. Xylar expected him to dodge. Instead, he caught it. With one hand, a tendril that could slice through reinforced battle armor stopped effortlessly in Ethan's grip. And then, in a single, terrifying movement, he yanked. The Prime screamed as Ethan ripped the tendril clean off, tossing it aside like a discarded toy. "Ha! Thought it'd be tougher." The Prime staggered. It wasn't just in pain. It was confused. Because this had never happened before. Nothing in its entire genetic memory had prepared it for this moment. For the first time in its existence, it was fighting something it couldn't understand. A predator that devours predators. Siler's squad watched in horror. "Commander, is he winning?" Kale whispered. Siler didn't answer. Because this wasn't a fight. This was a human testing his new strength. And the Shadrax Prime, the deadliest thing in the known galaxy, was failing. Ethan vanished again, moving too fast for even the Vulri to track. Then, a loud crack. The Prime howled in agony as Ethan punched straight through its armor, his fist buried deep in its torso. Siler's scanner flashed warning signs. The Shadrax Prime's body was shutting down. Its cells were dying. Its energy was being drained. And then, Siler understood. Ethan wasn't just fighting the Prime. He was absorbing it, piece by piece, eating it from the inside out. The moment everything changes. The Shadrax Prime let out one last, desperate scream. It collapsed. Its massive body twitched once, then fell still. The strongest predator in the known universe was dead. And Ethan stood over its corpse, stretching his arms. All right, now that was a meal. Siler felt a cold wave of dread wash over him. Kale was trembling. "Commander, what do we do?" Siler had no answer. The greatest apex predator in the galaxy had just been consumed. And Ethan had become something else. Something far worse. Something no one could stop. Final suspense hook. Ethan suddenly tilted his head, his eyes glowing faintly. His smirk widened. "Oh, I can feel it." Siler's stomach turned. "Feel what?" Ethan's gaze lifted to the stars. "There's something bigger out there. Something stronger." He grinned. "And I think it just noticed me." A new nightmare. The human evolution. The jungle of Drakthar was dead silent. Not a single creature stirred. Not the lurking reptilian stalkers, not the flying carnivores that had patrolled the skies for eons, and certainly not the Shadrax, because the Shadrax were gone. The last one, their king, their apex, their nightmare of nightmares, lay broken at the feet of a human who had ripped through its body with his bare hands, a human who had absorbed its strength, a human who was changing. Commander Siler tried to steady his breathing. He had fought battles before. He had witnessed planets burn, watched civilizations collapse, seen the horrors of war unfold in ways that haunted his every dream. But this was not war. This was something else. Something far worse. The transformation begins. Ethan stood over the corpse of the Shadrax Prime, his eyes closed, his body shifting. Siler's bioscanner beeped frantically, flashing warnings that should have been impossible. Ethan's muscle fibers were hardening beyond known biological limits. His bones were absorbing energy from the dead Shadrax. His nervous system was accelerating, evolving, adapting to a new state of being. Kel's voice was barely a whisper. "Commander, what is happening to him?" Siler's claws clenched. He didn't have an answer. Then Ethan opened his eyes. And for the first time since this nightmare began, he wasn't smiling. A predator who does not know its own limits. Ethan staggered slightly, his hands flexing open and closed. His breathing was deeper, heavier, as if his lungs were adjusting to something new. Then, without warning, the jungle exploded. The force rippling from Ethan's body ripped the trees from their roots, sending them flying like twigs caught in a hurricane. The ground cracked. The very air vibrated with something Siler had never felt before, something that made every hair on his body stand on end. Ethan exhaled sharply. And then he laughed. Holy shit. His voice wasn't quite the same. It carried an echo, a resonance that shouldn't have been possible. Siler's stomach twisted. This wasn't the same human from before. This was something new. Something worse. What happens when evolution has no limits? Kale took a step back. "Commander, we have to leave. Now." Xylar didn't answer, because deep inside, he knew. They had nowhere to run. Ethan flexed his fingers, staring at his hands. His expression was one of pure excitement. "Dan, I feel amazing." His muscles coiled like living steel. His eyes flickered with something unnatural, something not entirely human anymore. Then he looked at them. For the first time since this all started, Xylar felt like prey. The first true mistake, Cal's instincts snapped. Without thinking, he raised his plasma rifle and fired. The blast shot forward at full power, the concentrated energy of a weapon designed to punch through warships. A direct hit. The explosion engulfed Ethan, fire and plasma crackling through the smoke. Cal's breath was ragged, his hands shaking as he lowered the rifle. I had to try. The smoke began to clear. Xylar's mind screamed warning signals before he even saw what happened next. Because deep inside, he knew it hadn't worked. And then Ethan stepped out of the smoke, completely unscathed. His jacket was burnt at the edges, but his skin wasn't even scratched. He looked down at himself, then at Kale, and he smirked. "Huh, that actually tickled." Kale froze. Ethan tilted his head, and in the blink of an eye, he moved. 1 second, he was standing 10 meters away. The next, he was behind Kale. No sound, no warning, just instantaneous movement. Xylar's blood ran cold. Ethan was too fast. Kale barely had time to react before Ethan grabbed his rifle and crushed it with one hand. The weapon snapped like glass. Ethan leaned close, voice casual. "That was cute, but don't do that again." Cal's face turned pale. He stumbled backward, his breath ragged. And Xylar knew Ethan hadn't even tried. What happens when a human evolves beyond humanity? Ethan stepped away from Kale, stretching again. His body was still adjusting. He turned his head, gazing up at the sky. "You know, I think I get it now." Xylar forced himself to speak. "Get what?" Ethan grinned, but there was something darker behind it now. This was never about survival. This was never about just getting stronger. He clenched his fist. The very air rippled around him. "I was never meant to just live in this galaxy." His eyes gleamed. "I was meant to rule it." Xylar's breath stopped. Ethan turned to them fully, his aura stretching, shifting, growing. "You guys might want to tell your little galactic council something." Cal's voice was shaking. "What?" Ethan's smile widened. "Tell them there's something new coming." The ground cracked beneath his feet. "And it's hungry." Final suspense hook. Xylar didn't hesitate. He grabbed Cal, turned to his remaining squad, and barked the order. "We're leaving. Now." Because they couldn't fight this. Not now. Maybe not ever. As they fled, Ethan simply stood there, watching them go, his smirk never fading. Then, slowly, he turned back to the stars above. Because somewhere, far beyond Drakthar, something had felt his evolution. Something was watching him. And Ethan. He couldn't wait to meet it. The final choice. Ally or enemy. The stars burned brightly above Drakthar, but for the first time in his life, Commander Xylar did not find comfort in them. He and his elite Vulri squad had fought through endless wars, faced impossible odds, and stood against the deadliest predators in the known galaxy. And yet, nothing compared to the nightmare they had just witnessed. A human, a species thought to be weak, fragile, insignificant, had done the unthinkable. He had killed a Shadrax Prime with his bare hands. He had evolved beyond what biology should allow. And now, he was still growing. Xylar's instincts screamed at him to run, to call for orbital bombardment, to wipe this planet from existence before it was too late. But deep inside, he knew that would do nothing. Because Ethan wasn't just another threat. He was something new. Something the galaxy had never seen before. And soon, they would all know his name. A predator with no limits. Ethan stood at the edge of the crater, staring up at the stars. His entire body radiated with power, his muscles flexing slightly as he adjusted to his new form. Xylar's bioscanner had stopped trying to give accurate readings. It simply flashed ERR over and over. Kale swallowed hard, gripping his broken rifle, his hands trembling. "Commander, what do we do?" Xylar had no answer, because this wasn't a battle anymore. This was a decision that would change the fate of the entire galaxy. They had two choices: kill Ethan now, before his power became truly unstoppable. Befriend him, and hope that humanity never turned its hunger on them. And Xylar knew. They only had seconds to decide. The moment of decision. Ethan finally turned toward them. His eyes glowed faintly, something not quite human anymore. His smirk returned, casual, but different now. Before, it had been a joke. Now, it was a warning. "You guys look like you've seen a ghost." Xylar held his ground. "We saw something worse." Ethan chuckled. "Guess that depends on your perspective. Personally, I think I've never felt better." Kale stepped forward. "You're not human anymore, are you?" Ethan paused. Then, after a moment, he shrugged. "Honestly, I don't know. But does it matter?" He stretched his arms, his muscles shifting slightly, as if still adjusting to his latest evolution. "I mean, humans were never really special, right? No claws, no armor, no built-in weapons. We weren't the strongest, the fastest, or the smartest." His grin widened. "But we learned something that no other species did." Xylar's claws twitched. "And what's that?" Ethan's gaze sharpened. "We don't have to be the strongest. We just have to become stronger." Xylar's breath caught. Because suddenly, he understood. The galaxy had underestimated humans. They had thought them weak. They had thought them harmless. But they had failed to realize the real danger. Humans don't just adapt. They don't just evolve. They consume. And now, the most dangerous species in the galaxy had figured out how to evolve without limits. A warning to the stars. Ethan glanced up at the sky again, his expression thoughtful. "I can feel it, you know. Something out there. Watching. Not sure if it's a god, an apex predator, or something even worse." Kale tensed. "What do you mean?" Ethan turned back to them. And then, for the first time, there was no smile. Only something darker, something that sent a shiver down Xylar's spine. "Something woke up when I killed that Shadrax Prime." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Kale stiffened. "You're saying, something noticed you?" Ethan nodded slowly. "And I think, it's coming." Xylar's claws clenched. His mind was a whirlwind of calculations, strategies, desperate solutions, none of which would work. Because if Ethan was right, if something truly powerful was coming to find him, then the galaxy was already on borrowed time. And when it arrived, what side would Ethan choose? The Vulri Empire? The Galactic Council? Or would he stand alone, devouring whatever came next? Xylar took a slow breath. They had only one option left. Ethan. The human glanced at him. Xylar forced his voice to stay steady. "You said you don't know what's coming. And you don't know what you are anymore." Ethan nodded. "Yeah. So." Xylar took a step forward. "Then let us help you." Kale stiffened. "Commander." But Xylar didn't look away from Ethan. Because he had seen the alternative. If they fought Ethan now, they would lose. If they tried to stop him, he would evolve further. And then, no one in the galaxy would be able to stop him. So instead, he made the only move that might save them all. "Come with us. We can find out what you are. Together." For the first time, Ethan looked surprised. Then slowly he grinned. "Huh, didn't expect that." He took a step forward, stopping just inches from Xylar. The air around him felt heavier, charged with something unnatural. "You really want to work with me, huh? Even after all that?" Siler's voice was firm. "I don't think we have a choice." Ethan studied him for a long moment. Then he laughed. "All right, let's see where this goes." Siler finally exhaled, his claws unclenching slightly. The galaxy had just changed forever, and he could only hope they had made the right choice. Final suspense hook. Far above, in the cold vacuum of space, something shifted. A distant star flickered, then vanished. A voice, ancient, hollow, endless, whispered into the void. It had sensed a new force in the universe, something that should not exist. And now, it was coming to find him.